Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Rang, 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 rang.
Hold on.
Rang, 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 rang. It's a phone. Rang, 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 rang.
Hey! Oh, how you doing? Yeah. Oh, the kids? Oh, that's good. They're fine. I don't have any. Well, it was nice talking to you. Yeah. Hope you have a good one too. Bye-bye. Sorry, guys. That was Nomura. Just had a few things to wrap up. So, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Let's review it. In all, the game has left me extremely conflicted about it. To say the game is a game of peaks and valleys would be an understatement. The two's existence often thwart each other, but that will be discussed in greater detail later. So, without further ado, let's dig right into it. I'm not much for the idea of soul within a game, but the art direction in the original Final Fantasy VII is distinctive in its very grungy industrial setting for Midgar that emphasizes a key theme of the effects of rapid industrialization without ethical forces or boundaries in play. The designs are inspired and heavily stylized in their pre-rendered forms. The mix of both 19th century technology clashing with the ultra sleek and innovative technology as inspired by Mako is a visual representation of that theme. The remake's attempt to visualize a living and breathing Midgar is a bit flaccid, as it has about as much freedom in how to traverse the environment as it would in the original. However, looking at the game at a purely graphical standpoint in its more preordained settings, it is more than a visual feast for the eyes, with a similar vein of pure inspiration in its designs. The game has a few standout examples, which include the first bombing run, the Shinra building, Aerith's home, and the Dawn's mansion, all of which play back to themes earlier noted. Where the game becomes far less inspired, unfortunately, are where you spend the majority of the game. The slums, while certainly giving off the look and inspiration of a favela, do not have a particularly strong vision behind them. The visual difference between the amount of time placed into these environments is both a valley and a peak. Nobuo Uematsu's work and Final Fantasy VII's soundtrack are not unknown for having numerous reiterations of its work prior to the creation of this remake. However, the remake has been able to highlight the tracks that had been otherwise left to the refuge of the original game. Newly revised tracks like The Rotting Pizza and The Oppressed often aren't one-to-one translations, but in keeping with the narrative theme of the game, are more of a retelling, which has quality of varying proficiency in landing their narrative mark. The Oppressed still displays its downbeat and lively vibe in its more clear reggae stylings, while it features a remix for Battle, not too dissimilar to Kingdom Hearts as it has a more lively version of the track for battle engagements. also do appreciate some of the nearly club mixes of character themes being used in battle, with Tifa's theme being a standout example. Some of the other more prominent tracks include Genova's theme, as well as the squatting minigame in Wall Market. Where the game does not land, however, is some of the newer tracks that have been added into the game. For instance, the Wall Market theme, rather than the Oppressed, is a new theme instead, one that certainly has the energy and the vibe of a lively red light district, but doesn't have the memorability of a track like the Oppressed. Now, all these things are really just a setting, a dressing that you would put in a salad, and the salad, the greens are the gameplay. So, how is the gameplay? Mechanically, the game is not especially deep. The RPG mechanics keep the idea of the materia system for builds, but it also borrows elements from its more contemporary Squeenix games to create a weapons upgrade system, much like in Kingdom Hearts 3, that tries to keep weapons from being an objective step up from each other, but side grades so that they might all still be viable. Actual battles follow an action approach to which early gameplay incentivizes rather mundane rationing. As the game progresses, however, the player has to be a lot more conscious of the builds they create and the actions of the characters. The ATB system incentivizes a constant offense to keep the bar filling up, to do anything from performing a stronger attack to utilizing items. It seems like a logical implementation of the original system, but creates different gameplay consequences. In harrowing situations where enemies have more visually ambiguous attacks, are harder to stagger, or harder to get into a stun lock, or even when teammates are low on health or unconscious, the game incentivizes hit and run tactics, as any extended time interacting might lead your party to quickly perish. Although the least involved when it came to visual participation, I found myself most likely utilizing Barret and Aerith in tougher fights, since the reliable gain in ATB meant being less engaged. The system seems at odds with itself in that regard, but I might have to follow this up in additional runs on the hard difficulty. The game on hard further stretches these problems due to the lack of item usage. While it might be fair to say it creates more challenge, there then becomes the point of homogenization of each of the party members that follows it. Since I can no longer use Phoenix Downs, every member of my party needs to have Raise and Cure and possibly a Magnify on the Cure, since any character has the potential of dying. This of course runs extremely counter to their projected builds in some cases. The extreme case being Barret, who has the traditional tank sort of stat predisposition. This then reduces the amount of freedom the player truly has to creatively adjust their characters and builds. Of course, in any RPG or game like it, the harder the game becomes, the more likely you have to utilize optimized or meta builds. However, when that optimized build and gameplay strategy has you kiting around the enemy to wait your turn to get a strike in, almost as if it is turn-based combat, then it does a disservice to the attempts to make the game action-oriented in the first place. To talk more of the hard difficulty, it seems clear that the creators did not place much thought into the experience the individuals might have in many instances. Despite the fact that you cannot use items, the game's regular chests are reset, providing the same exact materials as they did on the normal or earlier difficulties. This often looks like potions or pieces of Phoenix Downs or high potions. This decision makes no sense when you cannot use them at all. It's especially frustrating since the solution seems so clear and it doesn't go at all implemented. If the developers provided the individual with Gil at least the equivalent of the selling price of those items, you would find the solution to be pretty clear. It seems especially clear that the hard difficulty was not balanced or made for individuals that wanted a true challenge, but rather to pad out the length further with manuscripts the player has the option of picking up that provide some story details not too dissimilar to Ansem's secret reports for the Kingdom Hearts series. In all, the gameplay really isn't bad, but you can see where the system starts to see the holes emerge. From this point on, I'm going to be talking a lot about the narrative, and this is where a lot of the larger spoilers are, so you have been warned. Okay, let's get into that. The story is mainly the same, but with the game being created in multiple parts, it gives developers an additional chance to delve into some of the stories and the backgrounds of the characters we care about. One of the additions to the game that I really liked was the opportunity to visit Jesse's parents on the plate. We get more characterizations of Jesse, Wedge, and Biggs, while also being able to introduce soldiers as a more serious type of antagonist, with Roche as opposed to just regular fodder. Other additions, however, cause a bit more controversy. The game's design and purpose as a remake is an interesting narrative, and its purpose is even more so. The game is extremely self-aware in its existence, and the penultimate boss is a discussion of its self-aware nature. Although it may not be advertised as such, the game is made for people who have already played the game and are familiar with the extended media surrounding Final Fantasy VII. Individuals trying to access the game and play it for the first time will not understand a lot of the narrative efforts provided thus far. Because of this acknowledgement that the player already knows the character, the game almost boldly underwrites its main protagonist while overwriting its main antagonist under the assumption that since you know what the type of person Cloud is, it becomes moot to further characterize or demonstrate his existence. I personally do not think this particular approach works, but something a bit more controversial that I think does work are the inclusion of the Whispers. The Whispers. No, not those Whispers. These Whispers, otherwise known as the Time Jannies on some popular forums, are the ones that try to dictate the flow of time to follow events as they proceeded in the original game. This is why they save Barrett from death, try to kill Wedge multiple times, and rescue Cloud and Aerith from the clutches of Shinra in the cathedral. To say it in other words, the Time Jannies are the lore-heavy fan base that hate deviations from the original. The end of the game gives the characters a near existential crisis to which they fight to overcome destiny, meaning that their efforts will unbind them from the fate of the original game. In what seems like a Metal Gear Solid 2 critique of game design and sequels fitted to remakes, the characters seemingly have their own agency, and as such they can defy the script of the game. Like MGS2, the game seems to purport the question of if it is truly necessary that we go through the motions again. What necessitates the existence of this remake? Would people truly be happy with the experience of doing the same thing over and over again? It's an interesting question. What this pays off to, unfortunately, will not be known until time comes, but to some speculation, it would give credence to the idea that Aerith may not die, Zack might live, or they are no longer chained to destiny. This gives the sequel an open range to explore other possibilities besides what's already been played. I find that idea engaging because if I wanted to play the original Final Fantasy VII, then I can play it. I can boot it up, I can insert it, or I could I think it is necessarily true that a good remake should not eclipse its original and become the definitive way to play, but rather, you know what? How about a food analogy? Because those always work. Imagine you have two sets of ingredients, each set similar. Two chefs cook those important ingredients and make similar but different dishes. Each have their faults, each have their merits, but most importantly, they can coexist together. If the game could be summed up in one word, it would be frustrating. It is frustrating that a decent and sometimes very fun combat system's appeal is not conducive to what is optimal. It is frustrating that a game with sometimes such clear and marveling set pieces are only a highlight in trudging through the lackluster and sullen environment. It's frustrating that the game's main plot elements feel fun, but are marred with the need to stretch the content out. And it's especially frustrating that since the end of the game is in the middle, there needs to be a large, substantial boss fight. In some veins, games that are remakes are meant to be fan service spectacles that idealize the images recreated for the characters at the time. In others, they can be done to reinterpret the base of the game and provide a more loose set of guidelines to follow. This remake tries to do both, and unfortunately it creates a very abusive experience. Just as Stella seems to withstand Stanley's neurotic personality and abuse for the pleasurable nights of passion in A Streetcar Named Desire, we too must accept the game's unabashedly poor designs and mishaps for the extremely gratifying yet short moments that make the game shine like a diamond. The question then needs to be, do we decide to return or leave once the inevitable second part comes?
Hey, Stella! Hey, Stella!